All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the new year and our first webinar of the year. Hope you're all ready to start off everything on the right foot by creating or maintaining healthy habits. Because today we are going to discuss creating those habits and specifically creating habits that will last a lifetime hopefully for you. We will touch on characteristics of a habit, how we form habits, and how we use that template to build on small changes for great big results. But first, I'm going to start with a quiz. How long does it take to create a habit? What have you read or seen on those infomercials for diet or workout programs? 21 days, 28 days, 90 days? Well, one study done at University College in London tried to find out the answer. They took 96 participants and asked them to choose an everyday behavior that they wanted to turn into a habit. Some people chose, for example, eating a piece of fruit with lunch, drinking water every day, or running 15 minutes after dinner. So what was the answer? Well, on average, it took 66 days until a habit was formed. One interesting thing right off the bat was that they found that missing a day or two didn't affect the habit formation much. So here's lesson number 1 for today. If you miss one day, please don't throw everything away. I hear every single day talking to people of someone that has started out great and then you get sick, you go on a trip, or you simply just don't feel like exercising or eating perfectly that day, and it turns into the end of your effort. Just like one day of good habits isn't going to give you perfect health, one day of bad habits isn't going to ruin your efforts. Okay, off my soapbox now. But back to the study. Another big point is that how long it took to create the habit depended greatly on what habit was chosen. People that wanted to drink a glass of water after breakfast took only about 20 days to create that automatic habit. One person that wanted to do 50 sit-ups after their morning coffee still hadn't created that habit after the end of the study at 84 days. And they had a graph that kind of showed the curves and determined that some of the habits could have taken as long as 254 days to create. Now, the study isn't meant to be a Debbie Downer on your efforts. It's meant to show you that creating habit can be done quickly, like I said, with that simple habit, but it also may take longer than that. So you need patience, you need perseverance. And as I will discuss further, you just need to choose simple habits to begin with so you can create the habit quickly and then you build from there. Again, I'm going to jump into that a lot more detail here in a second. So what is it about a habit that makes it so hard to make, and on the other side of that, why can't we get rid of bad habits easily? Well, it comes down to what a habit actually is and what characteristics it is made of. One reason habits are hard to form and break is because we're only vaguely aware of even performing them in most cases. Think about waking up in the morning. What do? For example, I put my contacts in, take a shower, head downstairs, eat breakfast, or you make coffee, whatever it is that you do. Now think about this. Did you sit in bed thinking, okay, what do I need to do when I get out of this bed? Most of you probably didn't turn on your brain until after you had your cup of coffee, right? So this is because once we have a habit, our brains turn off this thinking part of the equation for the most part. This helps protect us from what is called decision fatigue, which is a fancy way of saying that making decisions depletes our mental energy. If you had to think of every single thing you did throughout the day, you'd be so tired by the end of the day. It would be terrible. Our brain wants to focus on more important decisions, like big things going on at work that day. So it puts the day-to-day activities on autopilot. Now think about this. It can be good or it can be bad. If you have a cigarette every morning and it's become a habit, your brain isn't letting you even think about changing it. That's no good, right? So we'll get into how you can use that automation to your advantage here in a bit, but let's just touch on the other characteristics of a habit first. Habits are mostly emotionless. Through their repetition, habits lose their emotional flavor, if you will. Think about something that you've been doing for a long time, like driving your car. When you first got your license, you were so excited to get behind the wheel. You were probably a little nervous, trying to remember all the things you needed to do when you're driving, and it could have been a bit of a stressful situation on top of that excitement too. Think of the same habit now. You get in your car, you buckle your seatbelt, and you drive. You're probably barely even aware of that same route you take to work every day. Our emotions slowly fade out of our daily activities for the most part, which seems like it could be a negative thing, but it can actually be an advantage. When our emotions aren't as strong, we actually tend to feel like we are more in control of what we're doing. You don't have the same stress levels as you did when you started, so it doesn't take the same emotional toll on your body anymore. So creating habits, something like planning a grocery list, is the same way. At first you're stressed because you have to create this list out of nowhere, and then you have to think of all the meals for the week at once. It's stressful, right? But as you continue to do it each week, it becomes easier, and you just know that that's part of your weekly plan. You have to have that list done by Sunday morning or whenever you need it. You just do it. That's it. There's no emotion. It's part of your routine, and you don't think about it. You just do it. So you need to get through that initial emotional and stressful time, but it will get better because you won't have the same physical and mental response every time you do it. The last characteristic of a habit that I will discuss today is that we tend to do the same things in the same situation. Makes sense, right? This is going to lead us in the next part of our discussion, so it's important to get a good handle on this. It's all about context. You get out of bed when your alarm goes off, maybe after a few snoozes, but you eventually get up. Then you get ready for work, grab a cup of coffee, eat your breakfast, make your lunch for the day, drive to work, check your mail, etc., etc. We do the same things in the same order usually too. The connection here is that context. We do the same things in the same circumstances. Say you always get a cup of coffee while your egg is cooking on the stove. That's just what you do. But what triggered you to get that coffee? It was the egg cooking. Your brain was like, okay, time for the coffee. You get donuts on Fridays because Bob is in the office on Fridays and he likes donuts. There are hundreds of things we do each day and week because of where we are or who we are with. We unconsciously get reminded of doing things because of that pattern of behavior that we've created. And again, we're taking the thought out of it, we're taking the emotion out of it when we create those habits. So it's very hard to really even step back and think what we're doing. A scientific example of this is Pavlov's dog. If you're not familiar with this, Pavlov was a scientist who did an experiment with dogs. He would ring a bell and then he would give the dog food. After doing this for so long, whenever he rang the bell, the dog would start to salivate even if the dog didn't get food or see food. Our brain is triggered by cues we have created, so it simply expects things to happen in certain contexts. Another study is more in line with our purpose today, and it came from Iowa State University, actually. They took 123 healthy adults, and they asked them to rate their strength of instigating exercise and executing habits. Now, just to give you information, 25% of these people were considered overweight or obese, 5% reported no exercise regularly, and 50% said they had exercised regularly longer than 12 months. So then they took those participants and they tracked how often they exercised over the course of the month via online diaries. The results, which were published in Health Psychology Journal, suggest that it's the instigation habit or that cue to go to the gym that increases or decreases exercise frequency. In this study, that was the only unique predictor of exercise frequency. That's how powerful those cues are. It's pretty amazing, really, but it can make it really hard to stop doing those bad habits or start doing better ones because you have cues that stand in the way of those good habits too. If you always have that cigarette with your coffee, like I mentioned before, it's going to be hard to just have that coffee because your brain is literally triggered to smoke every single time you pour yourself a cup. Okay, so we know now what habits consist of and how those cues work. So how do we create a new habit? So what did we just get done talking about? We know our habits are triggered by cues. So first of all, we need to create a new cue, right? Easier said than done, absolutely. But let's start to talk about some tips to get started. The first step in identifying a cue is to look at your daily routine and identify any cues that you can use as a trigger. It could be using your drive home. Instead of driving home, you drive to the gym. That's your cue. The cue is the drive, which is something that you do every day. You can do squats while you brush your teeth in the morning. I hope most of you brush your teeth every morning, so you can use that as a cue. You can walk during your lunch break, which again, it's the lunch break, that's the cue. Exercise during commercials at night, the commercials are your cues. Prepare your homemade lunch in the morning while you brew your coffee or while your breakfast cooks. Set your workout clothes out before bed so you can see them in the morning. And you can make new cues as well. This could be setting an alarm on your phone or your computer at work to prompt you to stand up and stretch, or to eat that healthy snack at frequent intervals throughout the day. So again, you won't be hungry when you get home as much. Again, this isn't something that's going to automatically work right away. You still have to create that habit, which, as we know, can take a while. So just stick with it. And you can have internal or external cues as well. The most common cues are going to be the external ones, like those alarms or the daily habits, but sometimes they can be internal as well. Internal cues are harder to train and develop, but they can be very helpful. So something as simple as when you're sitting for a long time at work or at home and you get that feeling in your muscles or whatever it is that you just want to stand up, that's that trigger. And it's something that we can learn to recognize more as a cue instead of ignoring it. So we have to pay attention to our bodies, but we can use those internal cues as well. Now, creating a new cue is great, but what about those cues that trigger the negative habits? Now, there's no magic formula for this, unfortunately, but it's absolutely possible to break those negative habits with the same cues. First off, you have to ask yourself if you can change the cue. If you drive past the local ice cream place every day and have to stop and get that chocolate shake, then drive a different way. If it adds 1 minute to your commute, so be it, at least until you've changed that habit enough and you won't be tempted to go anymore. Sometimes it may seem like a sacrifice right away, but in long term, it's going to help you break those bad habits. You can't always change the cue, so if you can't change the cue, you have to work on using that cue to trigger a different habit, like we said. If you always have a bag of chips after dinner, then stop buying the chips. Or use the end of dinner to trigger yourself to go for a walk or jump on your treadmill or do some quick exercises instead of having that bag of chips. You have to change the habit as well. You can use the same cue, but you have to work on changing the habit. I had a participant once who always had to have a cigarette with her cup of coffee in the morning before her shower. So we worked on switching up the routine. She took a shower first so that she was clean, and then she didn't want to smell again after smoking, because that was the purpose of showering after smoking, was to help get rid of that smell. So just try different things. Get creative. Just make an effort to detach those mental connections. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but keep working at it. The brain is amazing in its ability to be as efficient as possible, so it's going to work against you for a while. But eventually it will realize that you're making a new connection, and it will make it so you don't hardly have to think about those good habits. So we have a cue. Next, we want to make sure we create what is called a habit loop. The habit loop is how your brain connects the cues and triggers to the routine, and includes something we haven't mentioned yet, the reward. So we've already talked about creating the cue before the habit we want to perform, but the final step in making the brain figure out that this loop is worth remembering is we need to have positive reinforcement from that action to start creating the connection to help make it automatic, thereby creating the habit, as we've talked about. When you anticipate a positive reward from an action, you're going to want to do it again. That's how the brain works. I certainly want to do things that you get good feelings out of, or if you get a reward from. One example of this is if you want to get up and exercise in the morning. Your cue is the alarm and having your clothes set out in your room ready to go. So you see those cues triggering you to pop in that DVD, but to really cement it, you say, I will have my morning eggs, my morning protein shake, my morning cup of coffee after I exercise. So your brain starts to remember that you will get that, quote, reward after you exercise, and it starts to create that positive connection with the cues, with the exercise, thereby reinforcing your desire to get up and exercise. So it can be as simple as that, and you can use something you've already done, but again, you have to make sure that you stick with that for a while, because you have to create that positive reinforcement. You can't skip the exercise and then have your breakfast. You got to make sure you get that exercise in there. So the equation is simple, but finding the right ingredients, that's the hard part, and that's what's up to you. It may take some time to figure out what reward works for you, and let's put away that thought that the reward could be an unhealthy snack or something, okay? Because I know that's what some of you are thinking. I thought it before myself. And the reward could be something as simple as doing a little celebration for yourself. Say, great job out loud to yourself and put a big smile on your face. I know that sounds silly, but I bet it makes you happy, and your brain is absolutely going to remember that. An additional note on the habit loops, loop comes from a man named B.J. Fogg of Stanford University. He interchanged the terms a little bit. He used anchor movement, new tiny behavior, and instant celebration. What he does is has people write down the anchor movement and new tiny behavior in a little recipe, as he calls it. You say, after I blank, I will blank. So example, after I turn off the TV at night, I will set out my workout clothes. Again, he's all about tiny habits. So you have to start small and then you build on those tiny habits. Another valuable tip from him is that simplicity matters more than motivation. I love this. What he means is don't try to change too much too soon. Keep it easy, keep it simple. If the behavior is really easy, you don't need much motivation to start with. But if the behavior is hard, you will need a lot of motivation. And motivation, let's be honest, it can be pretty unreliable, as I'm sure most of you had experience. Depending on how your life is going, that motivation can go down the drain pretty fast. So keeping it simple takes away that aspect of the motivation, and then you can build on those simple habits, and then your motivation will build too. And then that's going to get you ready for the big changes. Early successes build motivation. So simple successes, and then you're going to feel more confident and you're going to want to build on that. I cannot stress this enough. Make it as easy as possible on yourself. You don't have to be all in right away. But it does take time when you're like that. That's why I wrote this down. Be patient, all capital letters. We are a society of instant gratification. But if you have that attitude, you won't succeed in most cases. You can't have it all at once. Change takes time, and time takes time. You have to be patient. This is a lifestyle changes that we want to make. It's not a quick fix. So let's move on here. Just a few more tips for success to build on what we've already talked about. First one, find that motivation. We just talked about not needing motivation right away if you start small, but eventually you will need to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. You're going to find it very difficult to succeed at creating a habit if you have extrinsic motivation and not intrinsic motivation. If you're not familiar with these terms, intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from within, internal. Extrinsic motivation comes from the outside, it's external. So if you want to quit smoking because your doctor, your wife, your kids told you to, you're going to work hard, but chances are you're not going to put forth your full effort unless you have that internal motivation to quit. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes extrinsic motivation can be a great kickstart, and you should definitely use it. If I have a high school reunion coming up and I want to make that old high school boyfriend wish he didn't break up with me, I'm going to have some great motivation. I'm going to work hard up until that point. But what happens then? If you don't have a deeper motivation, like things like having more energy, feeling better, being healthy, something for yourself, it's going to be hard to keep that motivation up. And our motivation is going to change as we progress through the goals as well. You might start out wanting to eat better and exercise to have more energy during the day. But as you go along, you might see that muscles start to show up, and then your motivation shifts to include keeping those muscles strong so you can continue to do those day-to-day activities that you did when you were 25. So extrinsic motivation is great, but make sure that you have the internal reason for starting a habit. Make sure you are doing it for yourself for whatever reason, and so that'll help you keep that motivation burning. Next one, start small. Here it is again. I've already talked about tiny habits and building from there, but it's worth mentioning again. Every journey begins with a single step, and creating habits is one of those journeys that you cannot skip steps with. You cannot go from not running at all to running a marathon the next day. Everyone knows that. But I do think sometimes we have unrealistic expectations as to how fast we think we should be progressing. Just like I said in the beginning about how long it takes to create a habit, we need to consider the size of the habit when we focus on a realistic time frame to create it. And if we choose simple, small habits to start with, we will create those automatic actions faster, and building on them will be easier and easier. Have patience, start small, and start now. That way, a year from now, you will be amazed at how much you have progressed in a year when you start with a 5-minute walk once a week, for example. One thing that we're doing at Health Check with the new year, we're building up push-ups. So this first week, we're doing 5 push-ups every day. Next week, we're going to do 6 push-ups every day. We're going to build up the entire year until we're doing, up to 52 push-ups in every day. We're going to build up each week. So it's something that starts small, but when you consider what you're going to accomplish in a year, it's pretty amazing. Next tip, be compassionate with yourself. We are absolutely our own biggest critics, no doubt about it. But you have to be your own cheerleader when we're talking about creating habits. You're not ever going to be able to completely get rid of that inner critic, nor should you. But if you're mindful and you can turn some of those negative self-talks into positive ones, you're going to find that you'll be able to better create habits. So if you miss a day of walking, or you choose to partake in that chocolate donut on Fridays when you bring them in for Bob, don't let that critic win. Tell yourself you will do better next time. It's a learning curve for everyone, including yourself. Like the study at the beginning said, missing one day didn't affect the creation of the habit that much, but we also need to have the confidence and self-esteem to get right back on it the next day. And being compassionate and loving towards yourself is going to help you get back on that track. So kind of sappy there, but really we are too hard on ourselves. So be positive. Next one, enlist support. Find someone who will be there to support you on your journey to create those habits and can help you combat that inner critic that we just talked about. It can be a friend, family member, coworker. I find personally that my coworkers are some of the best support because you see them consistently, and they probably know your habits just as well as most of your family members do, at least during the day. And while we don't want to rely completely on that external motivation, knowing that you have people in your corner is always a positive thing, someone there to help you on your way. Along those same lines, being accountable is an important tip to follow, extremely important as a matter of fact. You need to have someone or something there that will be checking in on your progress to help you keep moving forward on your journey. That's the key, moving forward. This can be the same person that you go to for support, that family member, friend, coworker, or hint, hint, a health coach. That's exactly what we're here for as health coaches. The purpose of this person is to make sure that you're doing what you said you wanted to do and that you're working towards those goals. So if your goal is to work out 2 times a week, then this person will check in with you to make sure you're doing that. Knowing that someone is going to ask if you actually follow through is a very powerful motivator. For those of you who have done it, you can absolutely attest to that. And I know some of you are thinking, well, I can just keep myself accountable. Absolutely, you can keep yourself accountable. But I'm going to tell you now, it's very easy to let yourself off of the hook. You say you want to exercise 3 times a week, you only go 2 times, you say, oh, okay, that's fine. And that's great, because you can jump back on it next week. But if the next week you don't do it, you got to have someone there that might be a little tough on you. It's really easy to let yourself off of the hook. Next tip, set a regular schedule or as regular as you can. I know it's not always possible, but try to be as consistent with consistent with your schedule as you can. If you have a specific time dedicated to creating those habits like exercise or food prepping, and you put that in your schedule just like you would a doctor's appointment or a big meeting that you can't miss, it's going to be easier for you to stay on track. We already talked about cues and triggers. What's a bigger cue than seeing it on your calendar or in your phone schedule? You need to schedule time to focus on you. And again, I know that schedule may change depending on the day, but have it in there as consistently as you can to help be that cue. The last tip for today is to be specific with your goals. If you just say, I'm going to start eating better, or I'm going to start exercising, that doesn't give you any direction. And without direction, you're going to get lost pretty quickly. Most of you have probably heard of SMART goals, but it's worth dusting off and using this as a blueprint for the goals you're starting. If you've already set your New Year's resolution, re-look at it and make sure it has all the details to give you the best chance of success. Then let's run through what that SMART goal is real quickly. The S stands for specific. This first letter pretty much encompasses all the other letters. It's kind of a good summary. You can't be vague. I'm going to go to the gym, and then you expect that to work. Specific means putting in as much detail as you can. So it goes something like this. I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week at 5:30 p.m. when I get off of work. And I'm going to do 10 minutes on the treadmill at a 2 incline, and then I'm going to go do the weight circuit I found on Pinterest. very specific, and then it goes into the next letter, the M, for measurable. This is how we track our progress. So in that goal I just mentioned, it's the 3 times a week, it's the 10 minutes on the treadmill, it's the weight circuit. And then as you progress, you change this part of the goal. You could say, okay, I did my 10 minutes on the treadmill for how many weeks consistently. Next week, I'm going to start for 15 minutes, or I'm going to do the incline of 3. You need a way to keep increasing that goal so you have something to work for. That's why the goals need to be measurable. Some people do different things for the A, so I'm just going to include all of them. The first 2 are similar, attainable and achievable. This just means be smart with your SMART goals. Don't say, I'm going to go to the gym for an hour every day if that's not realistic for you to achieve. We already talked about tiny habits, and when you start small and attainable so you can see that early success, that will help motivate you as you increase and progress. You can always increase your goal later, so start off with an attainable goal and work from there. Some people use action-based for that letter A, which simply means that you are going to set a goal that requires you to actually do something. That's the go to the gym, that's doing the treadmill, that's the circuit. If you say, I want to lose weight, you have nothing to take action on, so you don't have that first step. There are a couple different uses for the letter R as well. The first one is realistic, which is the same as that attainable and achievable. Just be realistic with what you're trying to do. Know that it takes time to create habits, so don't set yourself up for failure. The other R that some people use is relevant. Make sure your goal is relevant to your life right now. How does that goal line up with your current life and your long-term goals? If it isn't getting you to that ultimate goal, you may want to rethink what that goal should be. And lastly, we've got time-based. Setting yourself a time frame to achieve goals is important because it makes you stick to a schedule. With our example goal, the time is simply the days you will go and how long you will go for. You could also set a goal of, I will start with 10 minutes on the treadmill, and then I will be running on the treadmill for 25 minutes at a time by March 1st. This is a longer-term goal which forces you to set more short-term goals to get there. So you obviously want to gradually increase that time so you can make 25 minutes by March. So you're going to be more mindful and work harder to get to that time by that date. If you simply said, I'll be running 25 minutes on the treadmill by whenever, that whenever could be March 1st, but it could also be December 1st or never, because you never increased your time because you didn't have a reason to. You didn't have that time to kind of push you along. So there we have it. Some oldies but goodies when it comes to creating habits, and hopefully some new perspectives and insight that you may not have thought about before. But bottom line, you have to start somewhere to create habits. So here's an action item for you to take away for today. Take some time, find a habit that you want to start or one that you just started recently. Keep it small and simple. Find a cue and find an appropriate reward. Do this now, like I said, and in a year from now, those tiny habits will have added up to some pretty great things. And don't give up. Here's that quote that I said at the beginning, or that I had at the beginning. I didn't say it. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. We aren't just one healthy meal. We aren't just one trip to the gym. We are what our consistent habits are. So let's go out and let's create some good ones. All right, and as always, use us for support. You can use the tracker on myhealthcheck360.com to make those goals measurable and keep track of what you're doing. Like I said, email a health coach, and we can help support you. We can help keep you accountable. You can always watch past webinars to get some tips. Those are on our blog at healthcheck360blog.com. This webinar will be up hopefully by tomorrow, if not by Friday. Follow us on Twitter for tips, follow us on Facebook for tips, or give us a call and we can set up a phone call with the coach as well. Upcoming webinar topics: February, burning fat; March is going to be sleep; and April is going to be red meat, friend or foe. So what time do we have here? It's about 12:29. I don't see any questions right now. I'll stick around for